Good day, everybody. Welcome to This Week in Svelte. I am your host today, Enrico, and joining me is Brittney.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here.
Yes, and today we have exciting news. We're on YouTube. Whoa! Isn't that cool? So it's all the same This Week in Svelte you're familiar with, and why not get started with the agenda? We'll get first into the changelog, followed with quick facts and announcements, and then we have a special community showcase for you today, followed with discussions and questions and answers. So that's the agenda. Let's get started with the changelog. Take a look at this. SvelteKit 1.27.2. In here, we have a patch, fix missing file and node polyfill for node version 18.11.0. This was a hotfix because SvelteKit currently supports Node.js 18.10 at a Corée version. You do not need polyfills for version 20 of Node.js, but in a recent patch of SvelteKit, the file API was not polyfilled because it's only standard in version 18.13 of Node.js. So now the polyfill is back to support those of you still on 18.11. That's it. That's the changelog. Moving on to quick facts and announcements.
Week today.
Super smooth. Here's a quick fact for you. I have a demonstration here of a normalized event dispatcher. And what I'm really trying to showcase here is the create event dispatcher feature in Svelte. You can use this to create custom events which bubble up once in Svelte. So if you have a parent-child relationship, your child can dispatch a custom event, and that will be something you can listen to in the parent. So in my pizza ordering menu example here, I have a field renderer on line 24, and it's listening for a custom event called onFieldChange. And for those of you watching, feel free to solve this more simply. So there's a hidden double solution here. But the one I'm presenting here is a way for you to have a dynamically generated form with dynamic fields. So my two fields here, one of them is toppings, and the other one is requests, such as, please don't add extra salt to my pizza. Sometimes you need a little request like that. So if you select your toppings, such as sun-dried tomatoes, and requests, notice how it's reactive. I am using JavaScript to detect any changes to the text input as well as any changes to the select dropdown. And that's what this field renderer does. The field renderer component allows me to specify server-side which form fields I want to render, and the field renderer does that. So it's a simplified example. On line 42, if one of the names exists in this options array, then it'll render a select. And if it doesn't exist, it'll fall back to rendering an input on line 51. So my input is using the standard input event, but my select is also using the standard change event. And the goal of this is to normalize the change event and the input event to be a single event that I called field change. So when onChange is called, you can dispatch field change for the select. If onInput is called, you can dispatch the field change again for the input. And this allows you to normalize things and listen to one single event on line 24 in the parent application. And that's a quick fact. But I wonder if anyone in the audience has picked up on a way to make this even simpler. Who wants to take a guess?
That's pretty smart.
The answer is in this really simple example, I could just forward onInput in the select. I could also forward onInput for the text input. And that way, in my parent application, I can listen to onInput, and I could use standard events. But if you have complex interactions that have slightly different non-standard events and you want to normalize them, then Create Event Dispatcher can help you with that. That's the quick fact. What do you think?
I think that's pretty smart to do it as one, and it makes it more, I think it makes it more clear that you're doing something that's not the same like there's some difference there, that it's not a normal event.
Yeah, I'm just zooming in to see a little bit clearer. Also joining me is Paolo. Welcome.
Hi everyone, sorry for being super late.
It's all good. Well, let's move on. That was quick facts. Now let's go to Community Showcase. I'm going to invite on the stage a special guest. Please give a warm welcome to Fenix, who will show off their project. Hello.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
Hi Phoenix.
Welcome. So while Fenix presents their slides, they're going to talk to you about a different kind of router that you can use with Svelte, and we hope you enjoy it.
Okay. So first of all, thank you, Enrico, for inviting me to introduce SveltePilot to everyone. I have been a fan of Svelte since the release of Svelte 3, but when I decided to switch from Vue to Svelte, the first issue I encountered was the lack of official router for Svelte. And after researching several third-party routers, I found that they could not meet my needs. Previously, when using Vue.js, I encountered issues where the Vue router's layout system and other features did not fulfill my requirements. So I developed VuePilot based on the official Vue router. And therefore, I decided to create a Svelte version of the router based on VuePilot, which is SveltePilot. Although SvelteKit has now been released, SveltePilot still retains its advantages and unique features, among which the layout system of SveltePilot stands out. With other routers, the router's hierarchy is directly mapped to the path segments. For example, in this scenario, pages under the /products path would all use the product layout, and those under /blog path would use the blog layout. However, if you want the about page to also use the blog layout, we would find that you either need to change the path to /blog/about, which does not meet our requirements, or manually use the blog layout in the about component. But this would cause the blog layout to be destroyed and recreated when navigating from /blog to /about, leading to performance issue. It's even worse if the layout involves loading remote data. Moreover, manually including blog layout results a coupling between the about component and the blog layout, which should not be the responsibility of the blog component. Another situation is where the path might be simple, but it requires a complex and multi-level layout, which makes the layout's hierarchy inconsistent with the path segment. Therefore, instead of mapping layouts to path segments and resetting them when they don't map, it's more flexible to decouple the layout from the path segments. So SveltePilot achieves this by removing the path attribute from the layout configuration's tree structure, associating an absolute path only with the deepest level of the main view component. This way, the router can determine a complete layout tree by matching the request path to the path of the main view. SveltePilot does not introduce complex designs like stores to solve route parameter passing and data hydration in server-side rendering. Instead, it uses the most primitive component props to address these issues. If you need to pass parameters to components, you only need to declare a props attribute in the root configuration. If it is the plain object, SveltePilot will pass it directly to the component. If it's a function, SveltePilot will execute this function and then pass the return value to the component. And if you need to pass server-loaded data to components, you just need to export a load function within the component. SveltePilot will execute this function during server-side rendering and then merge the return value with props from the routing configuration before passing it to the component. The code can not only be server-side rendered, but can also be rendered on the client side independently. If your load function involves more than a simple fetch, like querying data from MySQL on the server, you can encapsulate the complexity into a customized context object. We make the load function capable of calling different logic on the server and the client by providing different contexts for the server and the client. The context object is fully customizable, and you can define it as per your requirements. And due to the limited time and my lack of preparation, I can only introduce so much today. If you are interested in SveltePilot, you can visit the website for more information and documentation. If you have any questions or suggestions about SveltePilot, feel free to discuss them on GitHub discussions and Discord. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Fenix, for presenting. Everyone give our speaker a hand. Much appreciated. Good to have you on the show, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you,
See you.
Phoenix. I think this was very, very interesting. Also because, I mean, we are probably used to use SvelteKit, and this is a different take on a router, which is always very cool.
I think it's very interesting to see how people use Svelte differently. Like at my company, we don't use SvelteKit either. We use Routify still for our router on the front end, but we have like these, we have Webpack and Vite mixed together with like AngularJS and like some other stuff. There's like crazy ways that people can use Svelte, and there's lots of different things. I think we were talking the other day on our podcast, Enrico, about inertia, right?
Perhaps.
That's a sneak peek to like a future Svelte Radio episode.
Let's take a look at some comments. Simon, aka Captain Codeman, writes, I like the config-based routing option. File-based doesn't support all scenarios. Could this be used with a parent SvelteKit route? We don't, unfortunately, we're not going to do live Q&A with the creator today, but that's a great thing you can follow up on Discord for.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, it could probably be used together with SvelteKit. I mean, it's a bold assumption. So, but at the end of the day, given that it's a config-based routing, I mean, you just possibly use the router inside the route layout. I don't know. I mean, it's a bold idea.
Routing in SvelteKit tied directly to the compiler to where you could potentially like have an option in the config to like optionally turn off the router in SvelteKit?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, if you want to turn off the routing in SvelteKit, you just need to use a route layout and do everything inside the route layout. Like you can handle, you have the constraint that you cannot use, for example, the plus page dot svelte but I guess it's doable. But again, I mean, I'm just thinking. I don't know if it's not legal advice.
No, nothing's legal. But you reminded me of some of the shortcomings. But I think SvelteKit is aware of some of the other kinds of routing that it could support, such as a hash-based router for devices like embedded devices that cannot have a web server. So they use a simple C-based server that can publish up to 6 sockets at a time, for example. So if you're serving a static page from a small computer the size of a small computer, then yeah, you may need something like a hash-based router so that the URL can pull static files, everything with inline CSS and JavaScript. So there's still all kinds of exotic ways to route a JavaScript application. And with that said, let's move on to discussion. Today, we're going to have a very light discussion about choosing a database. And this comes up quite often because there are a lot of developers on the Svelte Discord who are either working solo on a side project or they're working at a small team or startup, and they're having difficulty deciding on what database to use. And we don't have terrific advice to give, but we can at least go over some of the broad options available. And I'll go first and say that there are 2 major categories. There's cloud hosted and self-hosted. I don't know how to use this tool, but that's okay. So if you don't know or don't understand databases, then the easy answer is go cloud hosted, because when it comes to managing a database, unless you're specially trained or you have lots of experience with it, configuring and maintaining something like Postgres is actually a huge chore that may slow you down or cause conflicts on production. So going with a cloud hosted Postgres or SQL database is a very good choice if you want low maintenance. Although
also,
oh yeah, go ahead, Paolo.
Yeah, also because I think I actually thought of hosting my own database for all my side projects, but obviously, like if you really need to use a database, like you have to think of a lot of things: the connection pool, it actually has to be at least a minimum performant. So it's not actually that easy. Just like, okay, I can throw it on a VPS and have it online always. So
Yeah.
it's definitely something you have to choose. You have to think about.
I think this is something good to point out, and it's very similar to if you're choosing like server versus serverless. If you're going to maintain your own server, it's also much more difficult to do that than it is to have someone cloud host or to use a CDN or some other service than to do your own server.
Indeed. And we're not going to say the magic word yet, but before we say the magic word, yeah, just remember your scale will influence your decision. So when it comes to self-hosted, there are straightforward solutions that are fairly maintainable, such as classic VPS or container runner. If you're using, I won't really name names or vendors, but if you're using something that can run Docker containers or a traditional VPS that runs a Linux box, then SQLite is a very good, fast, stable solution that you don't really have to maintain, because out of the box, SQLite can be installed as a single binary and it saves all your data as a single file. And nowadays, it's actually, in some ways, faster than Postgres. So if your scale is really small, or you're self-hosting a small project, or even a modestly sized one with, let's say, 1,000 concurrent users a day, SQLite can get you there.
I think SQLite was like, I read somewhere that it was actually being like SQLite was able to withstand like something like 10,000 connection. So it's actually pretty capable.
Yep. And let's highlight this comment by Kareem. SQLite being the only exception, it's easy to use in development and host yourself. Yeah, so this is like an easy recommendation, because if you don't really know what your scale is, then this is a great place to start because it does scale very decently. And when it comes to cloud-hosted solutions, there are plenty of providers of things like cloud-hosted Postgres or cloud-hosted MariaDB or MySQL. The reason why I keep promoting SQL so much is because it's the most mature. It's the one that stood the test of time. It scales very beautifully. really. MySQL has relational tables. It's designed to be straightforward to use, to write your own queries and pull data. So if you're writing a CRUD and you just want a place to store data, you really can't go wrong with that choice. But then there's the other major category of database, which is NoSQL, a document storage model such as Firehost, I think it's Firestore, sorry, and MongoDB. So those are mature products as well, but with a different mental model, because you cannot do relational joins as cheaply in those systems as you could in SQL, because in those systems you got to constantly write new columns so that your selects are faster. It's a very different thing. So you got to keep in mind the learning curve.
I think there's also like a third kind of database that is I've seen being used a lot in the last period, and is the KV, like the key value, like the row. It's just basically a Redis. And for example, Dino has the new like Dino provides a KV store. There's also I think Cloudflare, yes, provides. I think it's called like something like I can't remember the name. Like
B1?
Yeah, probably. I mean, there are all these names with letters and numbers. Choose a letter, choose a number, and it's a service.
Yep. So that's really all I have to say about choosing a database. Is know your scale, but also know your constraints too. Because when it comes to cloud hosted, keep in mind, if you're in Europe especially, it does matter to comply with privacy laws and make sure that your data is hosted within Europe. For example, in Canada where I live, that's also a necessity. Sometimes if you work in healthcare, you must host your data in Canada as well. So keep in mind compliance laws, which may push you in one direction over the other. Although some cloud providers do let you restrict the region your data is stored in, so that's useful. But if you self-host and you know where your VPS is located, then it's much simpler. And the performance is very good. It's nothing to ignore. Just because serverless is popular and hype, it's not necessarily the best choice for you. So know your constraints.
Yeah, I feel like you should self-host either if you have a very low traffic or a very high traffic, because if you have like millions of users, is not feasible to cloud host.
Or maybe it is.
Edge means.
Yeah, I'm just writing down what Stanislav shared. KV store and edge databases. Edge databases, much like edge functions, will provide database replicants that are as close to your audience as possible. So whenever a read or write is performed in a very hyperlocal database replica, it'll push those changes to all of the other replicas worldwide. So edge databases are becoming a thing now.
Fauna is one of the ones that does that, but I don't know which database they use under the hood of Fauna. But FaunaDB is one of those.
I think it's literally a different, like, I don't think they are using some other data, like it's literally FaunaDB. I might be wrong.
Don't use but they don't use SQL or something under the hood.
I don't know. I think it's a different model at all, but I might be wrong.
Okay. I did a podcast with him a long, long time ago, and I do not remember the details.
And there's also like someone mentioned Pocketbase, which under the hood uses SQLite, and also the front end of Pocketbase is built with Svelte. So.
Yeah, I am a happy Pocket-based user as well. So that's a good self-hosted option.
Use all the Svelte products. Appwrite also uses Svelte for their console, and their whole site is built with SvelteKit.
Yes. And also Thomas worked there. Thomas is cool.
Yeah, shoutouts to Thomas and friends. So let's see what else we can mention is Redis. So Redis, some people actually use Redis as a database. That is viable, but Redis is primarily a key value store for caching. It's extremely fast because it's designed to cache your SQL query results. So if you're constantly pulling the same SQL data over and over, you can store that in Redis and pull from Redis first. And if there's a cache bust, then you can pull from SQL and save your users and your servers valuable cycles. But once you get to that scale where Redis becomes necessary, you won't need our help. You'll know what you're doing by then.
And you should probably come here to talk about what's the best DB for you.
And here's a testimonial for Pocket Base. Nick writes, I use it as a framework to build portable software. It's great, includes many features out of the box. Portable software, I'm curious what you mean by that, because it is called Pocket Base after all. I'm not sure if you take your servers and carry them with you elsewhere, but it does have great features. It's like a backend as a service, self-hosted. It has login, it has user management, and it has, of course, collections of SQLite data.
And also, like, there's also a managed version of Pocket Base, which is called Pocket Host, which allows you to have a free Pocket Base instance hosted for you. Obviously, it has a lot of, like, you forgo a lot of the performance because it's on a shared server. But I mean, if you need to test something, it's an alternative.
I think of portable as being like composable. Like we talk about these headless CMSs being something that you can plug and play. So Pocket Base is something you could take with you if you changed your front end. Not speak for them, but that's kind of what that meant to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. Also, I think like Pocket Base is used literally as a backend framework. Like you can literally use it to serve your Svelte application, for example.
Yeah, you can reverse proxy that, and you can even use it to be an API layer in some ways, either in Golang or JavaScript. It's evolving. We'll see which direction it goes in. Oh, desktop software. Oh, so they got back to us about their portable software. I see. I get it now. So it's like system tray applications and things like that, because that's actually something I do in my day-to-day is ship software that is locally hosted. And that's a viable solution for that. Very cool. Alrighty. I think that's good for discussions. Now let's move on to questions and answers to them. We have a question for today. Yes. One of the questions that we pulled out of the ether is, how do I write a preprocessor? So Svelte and SvelteKit, and I think Paolo's going to bring something on screen soon.
Yes.
Svelte and SvelteKit have a concept called preprocessors. And this allows you to take what's in a .svelte file, run it through what's called a preprocessor, and you can interpret strings or code syntax in a special way, such as TypeScript, such as Sass, or anything you really want. And Paolo's going to take it away.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if it zoomed in enough, but I mean, this is a very super basic example of a preprocessor that I wrote just for fun. But I mean, something that you might be used to is this Vite preprocess. And this is what basically allow you to have TypeScript available in Svelte. And with this Vite preprocess, you can have also, for example, post CSS available in style tags. And there are other kind of preprocessor. One other famous preprocessor is MDisVex, which allow you to write markdown files and have it as Svelte component. And at the end of the day, like the thing that a preprocessor does is just taking your raw code and modify it in some way. So one example that I had about this is this one. It's very it's a silly preprocessor, but basically you have to return, like, a preprocessor is just an object that will take a markup function. This markup function will take an object with the file name and the content, and the content is literally the content, the string content of all your .svelte file. And inside this function, you can literally return whatever you want. If you return an object with code, which is different from the code that you are taking in, it will change the content of that file, basically. And in this case, I'm using Magic String, which is a library also wrote by Ricciuti. And this basically allows you to generate the source map, which is also something that you want to do to allow other tools to reference. For example, if there is an error, you want your user to still get the correct place inside their file, and you can do that with source maps. And in this case, what I'm doing is just literally using a regex to replace all the instance of links inside your Svelte file with an A tag. So, I mean, ignore the super complex regex, which I wrote by hand because, I mean, I literally never copy regex online. But ignore this, and I mean, I'm just replacing that content. Basically, this is targeting every URL, and it's just saying, okay, replace every link-like thing inside your text with an href to that link, basically. And so these allow you in your plus page.svelte to just have a text of a link. This is a feature of Markdown. And basically you get a link. I can click here and I open this and I get a link. And the interesting bit is that you can literally do whatever you want inside the preprocessor. So for example, I might want to, instead of showing the link, I might need, I don't know, I want link. And if I do this and I restart my server, I get the link to the repo is link. And obviously this will means that every link that I write inside my Svelte file, like for example, google.com, it will become a link that links to google.com. And you can also, like, this is the markup, but there is also like the preprocessor docs. Actually, you can search preprocessor. So this is the preprocessor documentation. And basically you can have a markup, but also you can have, I think, a style, which only takes the content of the style tag. And I think you can also have a script, which only take the content of the script tag. So with these basically object, you can change your Svelte code in whichever way you want. One thing to note is that writing preprocessor is useful if you want to provide syntax, a new syntax inside Svelte file. For example, there is a preprocessor for pug, which is a way of writing your templates. But beware of the fact that when you write a preprocessor, you are introducing a complexity in your SvelteKit project, in your Svelte project. A project that make use of a preprocessor is MeltUI, which basically allows you to have to avoid some of the verbosity of MeltUI. But as soon as you introduce a new preprocessor inside your chain, obviously you are introducing a complexity. And this means that, for example, if someone approaches your code base, they might not know about preprocessor. So imagine you go into a code base, and every time you write a link inside your Svelte file, it becomes a link with a link instead of the text. It will be pretty confusing. So if you want to experiment with preprocessor, feel free to do it, but beware of the fact that it adds a bit of complexity for newcomers to your repository.
Thank you so much. Yeah, if someone on the street walks up to you and sees your code base, make sure you document the fact that you're using a preprocessor.
I mean, it happens all the time. Every time I'm around, I always see strangers asking me about my code base.
We have an interesting preprocessor question over here. Nick says, I'd be interested to see if I could hook to call modal from this. So a preprocessor to call a modal. Do you mean like a pop-in modal or some other kind of modal? we'll see. But in the 10-second delays it takes us to go through the internet back to Nick, let's just say that preprocessors are very handy in Svelte because if you're using TypeScript, you're already using a preprocessor today. And I myself, I use Sass sometimes for my projects, but they also, because Svelte is a compiler, you're also adding some kind of overhead to the compiler as well. But if it's getting better all the time, I see like the Vite plugin for Svelte is getting more efficient as well. So it's an interesting long-term solution.
Yeah, if you're using Tailwind, you're using PostCSS. Anytime you have to put like the lang attribute in like your script tag or your style tag, you're using a preprocessor.
Yeah, also like there used to be a difference between the Vite preprocess and I think there was another preprocessor provided by Svelte, which I think it was Svelte preprocess. And like Svelte preprocess had a very cool feature that Vite preprocess is missing, which was the global style. So you could do style global and everything inside these will become global, which was very cool. And I think this is missing from Vite preprocess, but Vite preprocess is also much, much faster and efficient. So
we can't do that anymore?
I think you can do it if you're using the Svelte preprocess, but with Vite preprocess, I think it's not doable.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Like if I try to do,
I was like, oh, that would help me. I was actually writing some global CSS and having to do the colon global and wrap it now is like really annoying. So that would help me.
Yeah, I think it will not work. I might be wrong. Yeah, unused CSS selector. I mean,
so it doesn't grab it. So you have to do, can you show the colon global and then wrap it in the function?
Yes, because by default, let me try. I'm happy.
Do you think that the HTML output is ugly? Let's show that comment. But you want to make it pretty. I don't understand what you mean by that. Like the markup itself is ugly and you want to make it pretty, or like the Svelte hash for the class name?
Yeah, they were also talking a bit about the difference between a preprocessor and use actions in Svelte. So sometimes if you want content pulled from a server to be preprocessed, I don't think this is an appropriate tool because the preprocessor happens only at build time. I don't think it happens at runtime.
Yes, exactly. The preprocessor is basically happening right before Svelte get your code. So at build time. And what we were talking about is this global attribute that you can use basically inside, given that Svelte like scope your CSS. Without this global, this will be unused. And with the Svelte preprocess, you could do something like this. Like global, and this would have worked with the Svelte preprocessor.
I'm really surprised that we still have access to that colon global and not that one. It's like, did they just not add that one back in? Was there something that was causing bugs with that one? Like, it's kind of strange.
I don't know. Like this was something that I guess the preprocessor made. So whenever encountered a style global, just added global to every element inside the style. And I guess Vite preprocess never catch up to that. I don't know why. And I think we can even try. I have to remember. I might do this. Install package Svelte preprocess. Install this. We might see it work because instead of Vite preprocess, we could use import. I think it's Svelte preprocess.
This is the part where we pull in the mythical add-ons and plugins.
I think we can just do this instead of using Vite preprocess.
I'm amazed you remembered that it was like snake cased.
Yeah, and now it works.
Ah,
Holy cow.
Yeah. And also, like, I did not remember that was snake case is just a default export. So I
Gotcha.
cheated.
oh, that was all you. You knew it was snake case.
Yeah.
Well, that was fun. So thanks again, Paolo, for that demonstration on how to use preprocessors in Svelte. And thank you, everyone, for joining us on YouTube for our first episode using this format. And we'll see you again next week. So with that said, adios and thank you.
Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.